I'm Charlie, and my goodness, it is a beautiful day, so we thought we would come outside to teach you about our new series that we're kicking off. It's about a subject that I think you guys are going to love. I mean, this topic is something that you guys always want to talk about. It's something you always go on and on about. I mean, we're going to be spending the next 3 weeks talking about science. Really? Is it science, guys? Okay. So science, maybe it isn't exactly the kind of thing you're just dying to talk about, but I'm sure some of you really do love science. It might even be your favorite subject in school, and I love that. But there are also probably some of you who absolutely hate it because it's a challenging class or it's a subject that's just plain boring to you. And while we may not be on the same page about the subject of science, I think there's probably one thing that we can all agree on. Talking about it in church seems like a super weird thing to do. And you're right, it sort of is. I mean, because for a lot of people, science and faith are two different things that don't seem to go together. In fact, a lot of people see them as complete and total opposites. At first glance, nothing about science and faith seem to agree, and because of that, it can seem like they're completely at odds with one another. Now, when two things are at odds with each other, basically means that they're just opposing forces, and in other words, they're in conflict. So take these two ingredients, for example. First, I have baking soda. Ta-da! Baking soda. It's just like this odorless white powder, right? Okay? And it seems like pretty different from vinegar. Wait, vinegar? Guys, have you ever smelled this? Because I need a moment. It's real bad, okay? Now, so it seems like these two things, they don't really go together, but hold up. Wait, guys, where's safety goggles? Safety first. We're back. Okay, so they may even seem that they're at odds, so watch this. When we pour a little bit of the baking soda, and by a little bit, I mean a whole bunch. Don't do this at home, kids. Your mom's gonna get real mad. And then you take the vinegar, right? Totally different. Well, clean up, paper towels. Well, that's really a reaction, right? But isn't that strange? Because it didn't seem like those two things were at odds with each other. It's like volcano action up in here. You probably feel like there are things in your life that cause similar reactions to that. Like when you're mad at your little sister for borrowing your clothes without asking. Friends, I have 3 sisters. I know what it's like to be at odds with each other. And then when you find yourself in a fight with your boyfriend or your girlfriend, you're at odds with that relationship. And when your team is playing the biggest rival on the field and you're at odds with them, when two sides are going against each other, they are at odds. And for a lot of people, that's exactly what science and faith are. Two teams at odds with each other. Two teams that when they mix together, react, kind of like our stinky science experiment. Hey, but think about it. Topics like evolution, creation, and the way human beings were made, how things happen in the universe. You're learning about those types of things in science class now, but people have been arguing about them for years. And in these arguments, it seems like you have to either choose team faith or team science. And the people on Team Faith, man, they are super skeptical about science because it seems to discount some of the things that they believe about God and the Bible. Team Science sometimes has a hard time considering that God played a role in the way the world was made and how it works. And because of that, it feels like these two teams are at odds. It seems that they believe opposite things and they may even be against one another. Now, maybe you're thinking, who cares? Well, let me tell you, while this tension between science and faith may not bother you right now, there's gonna be a point in your life where you have to think about it because part of owning your faith means deciding what you believe about certain things. And honestly, that part of faith can be scary because what if something that you learn in science class doesn't line up with what you've read in the Bible? What if what you know to be true about science makes you question what you thought to be true about God? And what if ultimately you have to choose a team in this whole thing? I mean, what if you have to choose to believe in either team science or team faith? Now, here's the good news. I don't think we really have anything to be afraid of. In fact, I don't think science and faith are actually at odds in the way we've been led to believe they might be. I don't think we have to worry about them being at odds because I think asking questions and learning about science can be a really good thing for your faith. And to prove it, I want to go back in time. Watch this. Oh my gosh. Would it be really really cool if I had a time machine? You see, science and faith haven't always been at odds in the way they are often portrayed today. A lot of scientists back in the day were actually Christians who believed in the Bible and the God who inspired it. In the 1400s, there was a guy named Copernicus who studied the planets and the stars. Y'all, he actually discovered that the Earth revolves around the sun, and he's also a Christian. And then in the 1500s, this guy Galileo, you may have heard of him. He made a lot of cool discoveries about science. He knew so much that people started calling him the father of science. And guess what? Father of science was also, you guessed it, a Christian. But then later on, there was this guy, Isaac Newton. He is considered to be one of the greatest scientists ever. But he also spent a lot of time writing and learning about God. And yep, he's a Christian too. And then by the 1900s, this guy, William Kelvin, he was teaching people a lot about heat and temperature. In fact, scientists today still measure temperature by using what's called the Kelvin scale. And as I'm sure that you've already guessed, Kelvin was a Christian. You see, all of these famous scientists who dedicated their lives to discovering and learning about the way things work in the world also believed in God. They didn't choose to be on team faith or team science because they didn't view faith and science to be at odds with each other. They believed that God was the one who created all the things they were learning about in science. And science was just helping them answer the question, how does God's world work? For them, learning about science was a way to understand more about the God that they believed in. Okay, remember that science experiment that we did a little bit ago? It's still rank. It's a little stinky. But anyway, when we saw those two totally different ingredients come together to create that cool chemical reaction, at first, it may seem like that they were at odds, right? But what if I told you that's the exact opposite? What if I told you that only after the baking soda and the vinegar came together that we could truly understand more about each ingredient? I mean, when we saw that awesome reaction, wasn't it just because the baking soda and the vinegar were at odds? No, it's because they worked together to create something brand new. And I think the same thing is true when it comes to science and faith. When science and faith mix, we get a better understanding of how they work together and not how they work against one another. Somewhere along the way, science became so focused on the question of how that we seem to forget about the who behind it, and that's God. And in the same way, church seemed to become a place where it's okay to talk about God, but it's not okay to ask questions of the how or the questions about science. But I don't want to think that's the way it has to be. And honestly, I don't think that's the way God wants it to be. How do I know? Well, I think the Bible is an incredible record of the relationship between God and humans. It gives us some direction when it comes to faith and science. The very first book in the Bible is called Genesis. It's sort of like the opening scene to a science movie. Too much? Okay, well, that's fine. But it really is. It's like an opening scene. And that book lays the foundation for the rest of the story. And the very first words in Genesis, the first words in the Bible say this: in the beginning, God. Now, why is that so important? Well, because the very first thing the Bible does tell us is that God was there. Before anything else existed, there was God. He was the first thing we know to be true about the universe. And here's what God did. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This verse tells us simply that God was there when the world was created. In the beginning, He was there. He created every single thing we see and know today. I mean, even like the birds that you're hearing right now. He created those. And part of the way He created us is with this amazing thing called a brain. You know, the thing you have in your head holding your hair together? You know, that brain? That brain allows us to do things like ask questions and learn new information and consider the way the world works. And I don't think that was an accident. And you want to know why? Because I don't think God is afraid for us to learn and ask questions. He isn't worried that what we learn about science will change our faith in a negative way because He knows that two subjects don't have to be at odds. The book of Genesis may not give us all the details of how the world works, but it does remind us that God is the one who created it. God could have allowed all the details of creation to go into the Bible, but maybe He simply didn't want it to be like another one of your school textbooks. He wanted it to be more about the story of His love for us and how much He wants to be in a relationship with us. Or maybe, just maybe, God wanted learning about creation and the way the world works to be part of the way we learn more about Him. They say you can learn a lot about an artist by looking at their art. If you have a favorite singer, hello Taylor Swift, you can probably learn a lot about who they are by looking at their song and their lyrics. And if you see a really cool painting, there's probably something in that can tell you a little bit more about what the artist was thinking or feeling when they painted it. And I'm a reader, so I love this. If you read a really great book, there's probably something in it that you can learn more about the way the author sees the world. So according to the book of Genesis, the entire universe and everything in it is God's creation. And we are his artwork. That means you are his creation. The plants are his creation. The things around us in this world are all part of his art. And the more we learn about those things, the more we can learn about God. You see, I think that learning about creation can teach us a lot about the Creator. When we dive into science and start learning about the world around us, we don't have to be afraid of what it means for our faith. Instead, we can be excited to know that the more we learn about the world God has created, the more we can learn about God himself. So what are we going to do about all this? I mean, if what we said is true, that learning about creation can teach us a lot about the Creator, what now? I mean, if science and faith really don't have to be at odds, how do we learn about one in a way that helps us learn about the other? First, I think we need to get comfortable asking tough questions. Faith and science don't need to be at odds with each other. So if you have a question about science, awesome. But if you have a question about faith, that's awesome too. Being curious about how faith and science can go hand in hand is really the starting point for you to discover more about God. Next, we can look for answers to questions by learning about God. For example, and this is really cool, did you know that the earth is placed at the exact perfect distance from the sun? I mean, I'm not out here burning up, right? So it's perfect. And if we were any further from it, we wouldn't survive, we'd be freezing. And I think that shows us that God wants to take care of us. Did you also know that when a baby is born, they can only see a short distance, and that distance is so perfect because the only face they can see is the parent that's holding them. I think that shows us something about the way God created family. But did you know that the nerves in your body can stretch hundreds and hundreds of miles? Amazing, right? I think that shows us something about the way God cares about every details of who we are. Finally, we can learn more about God by talking to older, wiser adults. When we have questions about faith or science, a great person to turn to is a trusted adult like your small group leader. I mean, if you look to the left or to the right, they're probably over there. They're gonna help you wrestle through some of the questions and understand more about who God is. You see, learning about creation can teach us a lot about the Creator. And because of that, we shouldn't be afraid to ask questions or dive in to know more about science or faith. You see, learning about creation can teach us a lot about the Creator. And because of that, we shouldn't be afraid to ask questions or dive in knowing more about science or faith. I mean, after all, they're not really at odds like we thought they were. So, as you leave today, I want you to think about this. What's one thing that you've learned about creation that can make you appreciate the Creator?